When Notcry's first faux trailer was released, I made a huge mistake. And that was that I didn't pay that much attention to Flins. Now, I do have an excuse. There were just so many characters, so many interesting story threads, that it was just inevitable that I'd overlook something or someone. But now that I have not only seen Flins during the main events that occurred in Notcry, but also researched quite a bit about his lore, he has definitely become one of the most intriguing characters in Genshin Impact for me. So, let's go to the final night cemetery to talk about Flins's story and lore, and for me to share one of my theories. Kiryu Chudomirovich Flins is a fae that originally hails from Snezhnaya. As one of the Lantern Fae, he can change his form, and even though we see him as a human most of the time, his original form is that of a blue flame. The Lantern Fae are one of the rarest and most mysterious of Snezhnaya's Fae types. In fact, they are so rare that in the recent quest with Linnea, the Lantern Fae were mentioned as being legendary. Considering all of that, and the fact that the blue flames of Snezhnaya have been replaced with red ones, it is actually unclear if we're going to see more of this type of Fae in the future. But fortunately, we do know quite a bit about them from Flins's lore already. In Genshin, the Fae are long-living beings that can use elemental powers without visions. Not only that, they can do things that even vision bearers are unable to do. For example, change form at will, as we already mentioned. Once, these powerful beings were the closest to the Belyi Tsar, the previous Cryo Archon, as they were members of both the nobility of Old Snezhnaya and the Gvardia, an elite task force that is now instead made up of humans. Considering the appearance of Lantern Fae, not to mention the apprehension that travelers can get when they're being led by one, it is fairly certain that this type of Fae was based on the Will-o'-the-Wisps. Will-o'-the-Wisps are famously nothing more than a ball of light can be seen in the dead of night by weary travelers. Yes, some will-o'-the-wisps were thought to lead travelers to a safe path or even to treasure, but most legends talk about these spirits confusing people and ultimately leading them to their untimely end. Of course, we do know that at the very least, the only currently named Lantern Fae Flins is not such a malevolent spirit. At least not right now. So let's look specifically at his lore and the inspiration behind it. The most obvious inspiration for this character has to be the Flins from Slavic folklore, described as a figure with a long cloak, holding a staff and a torch. These Flins could be easily seen as the blueprint for the design of the gentlemanly Lantern Fae we know. However, no one seems to agree who that Flins really was, with different sources giving extremely different accounts. We don't know anything about him. Was he a real person who lived long ago? Or a deity of some sort? Or perhaps a powerful necromancer who could summon skeletons at will? This mysterious background has been incorporated in Genshin perfectly because the inhabitants of Nasha Town are just as uncertain about Flins's past. They see him as a mysterious figure, suspect that he's not really human, or outright accuse him of horrible acts at the first opportunity. And despite all that, They're also strangely attracted to the mysterious stories he tells and the noble way in which he carries himself. But as you will soon see, there is darkness to Flins, and there is another figure from folklore that could be used to explain those darker sides of the Lantern Fae, and that is Stingy Jack. As mentioned before, Lantern Fae are based on will-o'-the-wisps, magical beings that go by many names, and some of those are Jack-o'-lantern or Friar's Lantern. And these, in turn, are closely related to the story of Stingy Jack. Stingy Jack was not a good person in life. Yes, there are several different accounts of his story, but suffice it to say that in none of them he could be seen as a good person. He drank, never cared about anyone, and would do despicable things that ensured that he'd never go to heaven. So, when Stingy Jack's time to leave the world of the living came, he was, of course, to be taken to hell. But Jack was also extremely cunning. He not only managed to trick the devil himself, he was able to trap him. And in exchange for his freedom, the devil had to promise Jack that he'd never be taken to hell. In doing so, Jack had obviously won over the devil himself. But even he didn't realize the prize he was actually going to receive. Barred from hell, but never to be accepted into heaven either, Jack's spirit was doomed to roam the world of the living with naught but a lantern to lead his way. Okay, so what does that have to do with Flins? After all, rather than a villain, the Flins we know from Genshin is nothing less than a hero who was instrumental in both the fight against Rerir and the Doctor. However, it does have two undeniable similarities with Stingy Jack. The first is about trapping the devil. When the traveler first meets Flins at the flagship in Nasha Town, they immediately notice something strange about the lantern he carries. Later, we find out that Flins had discovered a strange and powerful item among the Wild Hunt, and he had managed to contain it within his lantern. When Rerir finally makes an appearance, he goes straight for the lantern and loses all reason when that item is purified. Because what Flins had trapped was nothing less than a piece of Rerir himself, his heart. As for the second similarity with Stingy Jack, we would have to return back in time for a bit. Flins, as already mentioned, was indeed one of the nobles of Snezhnaya. We do not know for sure what kind of values or what kind of personality he had at that time, but it is very likely that he was as noble, valiant, albeit slightly puckish, as we know him today. However, during the Kandrian cataclysm 500 years ago, the Belyi Tsar was lost to the abyss and was subsequently succeeded by the Tsaritsa. Many changes occurred at that time, and many Fae decided to go into exile because of these. Flins himself was impacted by the departure of the Belyi Tsar, and soon, unhappy with the state of Snezhnaya, self-exiled himself to Notcry. And that was a very dark time for Flins. While he was leaving his hometown, he couldn't seem to care about anyone or anything. He had no clear destination or plans for the future. And in this state of indifference, he found a certain tomb on an island. He had many dark thoughts at that time. Most notably, he wanted to toast the whole world and then go to sleep. In the end, he decided to simply slumber deep beneath the earth. But those dark thoughts, that indifference that had settled into him, did not disappear. Flins had made sure to be in a spot where he'd never be disturbed by the living. Or so he thought. For one night, the sound of battle awakened him. And yet, the cries of the dying soldiers did not stir him. That indifference that had seeped into his soul when the Belyi Tsar disappeared was still within him. The battle raged on, and the blood of the dying spilled over his tomb. The rituals that he had performed in order to keep his resting place out of reach faltered. And finally, Flins was moved by the dying prayer of one of the lightkeepers fending off the wild hunt. And in that moment, in an eruption of blue flame, Flins rose from the dead to walk the mortal realm once more. Now, that darkness doesn't seem to exist within Flins. At least, not on the surface. He still tries to keep himself separated from the other inhabitants of Notcry, but has probably inadvertently created many bonds with others, although primarily with other Lightkeepers. He still has a rather peculiar way of doing things, and is a great manipulator and liar, but he does not seem to have ill intent. Indeed, most of his actions seem more like a joke made by someone with a sense of humor that is slightly odd, but rather charming. For example, Flins, who, on account that he is a Lantern Fae, does not need to eat or drink to sustain himself, does have a sense of taste. And one of the things that he truly despises is the taste of water, as he describes it as plain and tasteless.
Silence!
And now, despite that, when Ilua visits him at the final night cemetery, what does Flins do? He prepares 2 glasses of water, both of which are actually intended for Ilua. Flins goes even so far as to offer him 3 or 4 glasses, or if he so wishes, even the whole pot of water. Maybe in his Fae mind that is a great joke that us mere mortals simply wouldn't understand. But back to the Flins when he was neither noble nor mischievous. The indifference towards the whole world and life itself, not to mention the unrestricted anger, is an intriguing state for someone in Tevat to be in. Especially if the person has changed suddenly and completely. Because, well, we've already seen such people. Yes, the ones in Inazuma who had lost their visions due to the Vision Hunt decree. But does that have anything to do with Flins? He, after all, does have a moon wheel, and to begin with, he doesn't even need any kind of vision to use his powers, right? Let's return one more time to the reign of the Belyi Tsar, when Flins was one of the nobles of Snezhnaya. It is said that at that time Flins received a gift from the Belyi Tsar, a gem, Tear of the North, that could protect its bearer. That gem was eventually surrendered by Flins to another noble, Sokolov, all because of a bet. Although we can't really be sure that that is the whole story. Flins never gives a full account about his past after all. What we do know is that at the time Flins lost the gem, It was a beautifully transparent one, and that as soon as Flins had lost it, he vanished from Snezhnaya, set on the path of darkness that we already discussed. This is incredibly reminiscent of those in Inazuma who had lost their visions, because visions are not only something that give the user elemental powers, they're connected to the person's strongest desires, to the core of their identity. Losing it means losing sight of what matters and maybe even losing the most base desire to keep going forward. It was much later, even after Flint had joined the Lightkeepers, when a man down on his luck found him and asked him if he'd like to buy a certain gem, something that was once given by a Snezhnaya noble to one of his ancestors. Flint was all too ready to take it off the man's hands, as it was indeed the gem he had lost long ago. And here is where things start to get complicated. When Ilua notices Flin's moon wheel for the first time, Flynn spins him a tale that he had acquired it cheaply at an auction, where people didn't know its true value. Ilua doesn't really buy that story and soon confirms that no such auction has ever taken place. Caught in a lie, Flynn explains to him what the gem really is and how it had come to him one day in his showroom. Here, by the way, the showroom is a room full of skeletons carefully arranged by Flins. Uh, that is his hobby, if you were wondering. It's all because he wants to learn how to fight the Wild Hunt. Trust me. Well, trust him. Anyway, returning to the moon wheel. It is intriguing that Flint insists that it just came to him when he was all alone. It might be true, but Flint does lie, as we already know, and even if he isn't lying, his words might still be hiding important information. Did the moon wheel appear out of nothing? Or did a spark ignite in the gem that Flint had gotten back from that merchant? Just like Inefa's moon wheel came into existence from an already dim vision. With Flint's, we may never know. I would like to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Flint's lore? Do you think Flint lost his vision and that is why his identity, his ideals, and perception of the world changed so rapidly? And what do you think is the truth behind his current moon wheel? To be honest, I've been loving the Fae lore of Genshin and can't wait for Snezhnaya. I hope we get more answers there. But for now, thank you for watching and see you another time. Bye bye!